Mr. B's speed history. Now then, people, today we're going to have a reasonably rapid trot through the League of Nations from its foundation, what it gets up to in the 1920s, and then finally to its ultimate failure in the 1930s. So let's crack on. So the first thing is that what was the League of Nations trying to do? Well, it was an international peacekeeping organisation set up based on Wilson's 14 points. It had four main aims. Remember side, it wanted to stop wars by collective security, that is all the members ganging up together to stop one country attacking another. It wanted to improve conditions for people. It wanted to disarm. All members who signed up to the League of Nations promised to disarm. This would come back, their lack of ability to disarm would come back to haunt them in the 1930s, and they wanted to enforce the peace treaties of the First World War. Not just for Versailles, but the treaties for the other countries, and that includes the management of their ex-colonies known as mandates. So, foundation. The next thing we need to look at is there were some structural weaknesses. From the very start, the League of Nations had problems. The major problem was the world's superpower, the United States. The keystone, as one famous cartoon puts it, did not join. The other major power of the time, the Soviet Union, did not join, and all losing countries of the First World War, including Germany, obviously, were not allowed to join. The key decision makers were the Council, which included Britain, France, Italy and Japan as permanent members. 4 other countries were chosen by the Assembly, and they had to universally agree to take action. Any one of them could stop any action by the League by using a veto. Disputes and fighting between members would be arbitrated. So if one member country attacked another, I don't know, let's imagine Japan attacks China in 1931, then the League of Nations would investigate and decide what to do. This takes time, fighting continues, it is too slow. But if they actually made a decision, they then could decide to do things, which could basically censure countries, tell them off, saying what naughty people they'd be. They could impose some sort of sanctions, so this removal of some sort of trade or financial support, but it only applied to members. The League had no power over non-members. Again, this becomes important in the 1930s, as does the terrible inaction of Britain and France towards Germany and the aggressive actions of Italy and Japan. So that's weaknesses. Surely it must have done something, I hear you say. And yes, it does. So there are some successes. It sets up a number of international special commissions, some on slavery, some on medical care, some on developing trade. And they are, by and large, reasonably successful. So, for example, the Commission for Refugees successfully relocates over 400,000 prisoners of war after World War I. I don't have time to go into details in this speed version, but there are successes in terms of settling disputes between members in terms of the Åland Islands, between Finland and Sweden, in Upper Silesia and over the Bulgarian crisis. And things do look up in the 1920s as Germany and the USSR become members. However, there are ongoing failures. So, despite promises in the covenant, there are no disarmament. There's no disarmament. The Washington Naval Treaty doesn't count because it doesn't involve the League, it involves non-member USA, so don't get too drawn into that one. It fails to settle some disputes in regards to Vilna and Corfu, and increasingly as the 1920s moves through, countries ignore the League and make agreements outside the League, most significantly the Locarno Treaty and in 1929 the Kellogg-Briand Pact. So the 1920s then are a mixed picture. Right, let's rapidly move on to the 1930s. So, disarmament. is one of the big failures of the League. It promises to do something about it in the Covenant. It fails to do something about it in 1932. But eventually, in 1932, it calls a conference after many years of pressure. No agreement is reached, and Hitler and Germany use this as an excuse to leave the League and rearm. And I don't say this about Adolf Hitler very often, but he did have a point. All the member countries had agreed to disarm and none of them had, so he felt justified in leaving and rearming. Okay, Manchuria. Remember, Japan is a founder permanent member of the Council. It had been given, after the First World War, the right to operate a train line between two trading posts in Chinese Manchuria. In 1931, the Japanese claimed that China had bombed their railway at a place called Mukden, and it's used as an excuse to invade and attack China. Lord Lytton is sent by the League of Nations, takes a year to investigate while the fighting is still going on, and finds that the Japanese had faked the incident. So Japan, a permanent member of the Council, is condemned. But what does it do? It continues with the invasion. It leaves the League and establishes a puppet state in Manchuria, which it calls Manchu Kuo, and continues attacking and invading different parts of China. And some historians actually mark this as the start of World War II, because the fighting then continues between Japan and China and then expands further. Anyway, moving on. Next one. Oh, another founder member of the Council, Italy, attacks Abyssinia, who is a member state. Abyssinia appeals. There are sanctions imposed on Italy. Remember, friendly Italy. Italy in 1934 had moved armed forces to its border with Austria, which made Hitler step back from an Anschluss in 1934. So Italy is important to Britain and France. However, there are limited sanctions, but it doesn't impose sanctions on oil. It doesn't close the Suez Canal. Two things which have really probably stopped the Italian invasion in its tracks. Britain and France tried to make a secret deal to give Italy much of Abyssinia, but leave a little bit so the League could say, oh, we saved some of it. I wonder if that sounds a bit like Ukraine currently. Anyway, moving on. It ends up being the worst of all worlds. Abyssinia is conquered. The League looks weak. Italy breaks with Britain and France and forms an alliance with Germany. And the famous historian A.J.P. Taylor, don't ask me what the AJP stands for, describes this act as the death of the League. And then finally, expanding the trend that began in the 1920s, it is simply ignored. The League of Nations does not manage international agreements. You have the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. Oh, Britain, founder member of the Council, the League's supposed to uphold the Treaty of Versailles, agrees with Germany to rearm. The League does nothing when Germany remilitarizes the Rhineland, in flagrant breach of the Treaty of Versailles. Doesn't stop an Anschluss with Austria. Again, should be enforcing the League of Nations. And when there's a crisis over Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia that Hitler claims should be part of Germany, make Germany great again. There's a crisis, there's a conference, and there's an agreement. And that involves Britain and France and Italy and Germany, not Czechoslovakia and not the League. And so it is ignored. So by the 1930s, it fails at disarmament. It fails in two major conflicts, in Manchuria and in Abyssinia, and it is widely ignored. That was not a very speedy speed through the League of Nations, but it's critical. Hope you found it useful. Thank you. Good luck with any revision. As ever, if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. If you want a more detailed response from me, there's my email address. Good luck with all that hard work, people.